Hi guys, Ross here and welcome back to another video. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about how we can use the volume builder and the volume mesher to create these organic interiors in Cinema 4D. This is a tool which has been around for quite a while now, but it's super versatile and allows us to create all sorts of different results. And I want to talk about how I used it in this Patreon video to create this abstract kind of flowy interior scene. So we're going to talk about how I approach a scene like this and some of the tips and tricks and techniques that I use when using the volume builder and the volume mesher to create these types of scenes. So a lot packed into this video. I hope you're going to enjoy it. Just like some of the previous tutorials, this is an extract from an old Patreon video where we then continue to go on and do the lighting and the texturing. So if you're more interested in that side of things, then I would recommend you go and check out the Patreon. But this still is packed full of lots of interesting information. So I'm looking forward to sharing this with you. So I hope you enjoy the video and I'll catch you in the next one. Enjoy.
So we're starting off in a blank scene. I've already saved it just because if things go horribly wrong, I like to have backup copies, and this is your friendly reminder to go into your preferences and go to files and enable autosave. So I have mine set to save every 5 minutes with a limit of 10 copies. That is good enough for me, but it's definitely saved me a couple times. It's definitely worth just enabling that. So yeah, let's start off with a figure. And this is kind of my go-to whenever I'm building these interiors. And I must admit, I have already had kind of a trial run at this, and I've got a composition which I've already kind of figured out just because I wanted to spend more time talking about setting up these types of shots and the actual techniques involved, as opposed to looking at composition, which I think I've dived pretty heavily into in my previous interior tutorials. So I've got my figure, and this is just a great starting point just so we can kind of figure out the scale and the size of everything. And let's get a floor in place. So I'm going to go for something 2040 by 2040, and that's going to be roughly the size of like the whole environment. Then let's start to build out the ceiling. So let's just control drag this, and again the height's going to be the same, but the width is going to be 674. So quite a narrow area here, I suppose, but once we start to build the walls out and get the camera in place, it will all make sense. Let's get some cubes in here, and these will be our walls. Like I said, I've already got some numbers in mind, so this needs to be about 305 to the right, and this needs to be 58 centimeters in width. And let's just drag this up and maybe just elongate this and move it back slightly, something like this. There we go, that should match up perfectly with the edge of that. And then let's just control drag this, and we'll just make this minus 305, so that's even on both sides. And then let's control drag one of these, rotate this, and set this to 0 on the x-axis, and kind of move this to the back here, and that'll be our back wall. So let's get the camera set up in place as well. So we'll just come down to this standard camera here, which is now kind of the native redshift camera, as long as you have your renderer set to redshift here, which we do, so that's all good. Let's zero out all of the coordinates and move it back on the z-axis. And the good thing about having a figure as well is that we can kind of line up our camera with where the eyes on the figure would be. And this is a great kind of reference for making sure the height of your camera is in line with what the height would be if you were actually taking a photo, which I think just helps to make things feel a bit more natural and realistic as well. So let's set this to minus 1060, which is kind of the value I have. And I'm also going to drop the focal length down to something like 24 millimeters. And that is because with these kind of interior shots, I have found that using a lower focal length, which gives you a wider angle camera, feels a bit more realistic, because we're so used to seeing these wide angle shots when we do look at photos of interiors. Because whenever you go onto like some property website and they want to show off a house and make sure it looks as good as possible, they use a wide angle lens in order for the room to feel bigger. And I think we've become quite accustomed to this. So whenever I do these interiors, I do tend to now use these lower focal lengths. But the only thing I do as well as that is I also adjust the sensor size. So by default, it's going to be 36 millimeters. And in the latest version of Redshift, we now have all these different presets, but I'm actually just going to drop this down manually, and I'm going to go for something like 22, I believe. Let's try something like that. And you can see as I decrease it, it keeps that wide angle, but it does just flatten it a little bit. So you get that kind of in between of it being wide angle and also feeling like it's a high focal length, which I think is like a perfect way to get the best of both worlds. I'm also just going to change this to a 1080 by 1350 aspect ratio, and this looks pretty good. Obviously this isn't perfect just yet. We need to do some things to build out this composition, but let's just dive straight into like how we can take this basic structure and make it feel like all fused together, make it feel quite like fluidy and organic, and then we can build on top of that as we go. The main tool we're going to use for this is the volume builder. So let's just grab that. I'm then going to hold Alt and select the volume mesher to make it apparent. Basically, we're just going to drag everything into the volume builder. We're going to notice two things. First of all, if we jump out of the camera, our objects, our cubes do feel rounded. So they're straight away, we're starting to get towards that kind of nice, like fused organic feel, but we're missing the ceiling and we're missing the floor. You can see we can actually see the lines where the floor and the ceiling should be, but they've disappeared. This is one of the things to watch out for when you are building using the volume builder and the volume mesher. Is an object without thickness is usually just going to disappear because it has nothing to kind of like blend everything to, so it's just going to fall apart. So instead of using a plane, I'll actually use a cube, and we'll just set it up to be the same size, so 2040 by 2040. But let's maybe set the height to be something like 10 centimeters, which means I need to make it -5 on the y-axis so it sits on the floor of the work plane. And now if I drag this into the volume builder and I just delete both of these planes, we can see that it still doesn't appear, okay? Which maybe makes me think we need to increase the height on the y-axis even more, which we do. So let's try this again. There we go. And now our floor appears, and we can just control drag this for the ceiling. So let's maybe move this up like so. Now you can see we have all of our walls and they're all fused together. You can see we get some lovely kind of rounding and like beveling as the different objects connect with each other, which is quite nice. This is now like a pretty simple workflow to refine and iterate and like build upon. So I could get a cube and I could move this over, maybe move it a bit closer and increase the height, maybe something like this. Maybe I'll move it back a little bit to like here and all the way to the top. And all I need to do is drop that into the volume builder, and straight away it's going to fuse it with everything else. I could then control drag this, move that over there. The same thing, it's all just going to work together. Now, the one thing we do notice is that we have some kind of artifacts going on. So here it's quite a harsh line, whereas here it's quite smooth. It just looks a little bit janky. Let's drop the voxel size down, and this is basically going to be the resolution. So the lower you go, the more high res it's going to be. And the way we can see that straight away is if we go to quick shading lines, you can see this is the topology of our interior. And if I was to drop this down to 3 centimeters, you can see we now have a much more dense mesh. And if I go back to quick shading, it's going to solve some of those problems, but now we've got a much more harsh and rigid interior, which isn't really what we want. We're trying to make it feel a bit more fluid. The next thing we could do is we can grab an SDF smooth. So if I just click this, it's going to add this Gaussian blur by default, and straight away we're going to go back to more of that kind of rounded feel that we had a minute ago, but now it's higher res. We're not getting as many kind of glitches, and we're still getting that lovely organic feel. So we could actually increase the voxel distance. So I could bump this up to something like 3, and that basically is going to increase the radius of that blur. So you can see now that's starting to blur a bit more. We could also increase the iterations. So that's going to iterate twice, which should just mean we get a little bit more accuracy and more rounding out of that SDF smooth, which again just helps to enhance that kind of rounding and that organic feel to our interior. There's a few different operators. We have Gaussian, we have mean, which tends to be a little less blurred. You still keep some of the harshness of each of these objects, and there's a few different ones in here as well which will do slightly different things, but Gaussian tends to be the go-to when I'm trying to create these quite smooth, silky interiors. So let's keep it on Gaussian for now, and let's go over a few other things we can do to build this interior. So obviously at the moment we've got no windows. Obviously we've got these kind of open-ended areas of the building which we will need to close, so let's maybe work on those first. So let's get a wall behind this camera, and I'm going to disable the volume builder because it can become quite slow. So let's maybe move this back. We'll set this up as like a wall behind the camera, so let's maybe move both of these walls back, move this across like so, like that. Move that ceiling back, and now we could probably move this forward. So let's just dive into the camera. That's fine, cool. And that's just going to close that off. let's move this forward like so. And if we just enable this, now we should have closed off that front part. Give it a second, and you can see in the bottom left when it's kind of working on building that volume builder, and it might help if I actually drag it in. And one thing you do have to be aware of is whenever you drag a new object into your volume builder, it's going to move it straight to the top. So now this is actually above our SDF smooth, which means it's not getting that same kind of Gaussian blur as the rest of the objects. So we just need to drop that down below the SDF smooth. Obviously, if you want to have different SDF smooths for different objects, then this is a great way to kind of layer and affect things differently. But for now, because we're just building the shell, we'll put it below the SDF smooth. So we want some windows in here, which obviously we're going to want to have some windows to let some light in. Again, it's pretty easy to do. We're just going to get a cube. So I'm going to control drag this one here, and say I will set this up like this, and I want it to intersect our wall on the right hand side. So let's just decrease the height like this, and you can see it's coming inside and it's sticking outside the building as well. And this is basically going to work like a Boolean operation. So if I drag this into our volume builder and give it a second to update, we'll drop it below the SDF smooth. And you can see next to each of these objects, we have this mode. And by default, it's set to union, which means it's basically going to combine this object with all the others. But if we press the drop down box, we can change it to subtract or intersect. And if we change this to subtract, you're going to see that it's going to cut that object out of the other objects. Now we have this lovely window on the right hand side, and we can control drag this and move this over to the left. So let's do that quickly. Give that a second to update. Probably whilst you're iterating, you could get away with using a higher voxel size just to make things a bit quicker. So I may just update that to something like 6 centimeters just to keep things a bit quicker. And there you go. So now we have these windows on the left and right hand side, which are helping to obviously let some light in. And then let's also just kind of build on this and do some other things to help make this feel a bit more organic. I'm actually going to use the spline pen because I want there to be like this arched part of the ceiling here where it kind of goes up straight and then arches over as it connects to the ceiling. So we can do that with the spline pen. So I'm going to go into the right hand side view down here, grab the spline pen and literally just click and just make some points. And let's go for something like this where it curves like so, and then we'll just finish that point there. Let's have a look at this, and I'm actually going to flip this because I realize I've done it the wrong way. Let's have a look at that, and I'm going to go back into point mode and maybe just pull this out and exaggerate that a little bit. Okay, cool. And I'm going to move both of these bottom points up. So I'm going to get the rectangle selection, just move these up because I want it to start about halfway up the wall like this. That looks pretty good to me. And let's just move both of these points forward. Cool. So we can drop this into an extrude. So I'm going to hold Alt and put it into an extrude, and let's move this over and move it back so it goes into this wall. And let's disable the volume builder, the volume mesher, and we'll just drop that there. And I'm just going to hide these windows quickly. Make sure to go in object mode, hold shift, and let's just hide both of those just so I can actually see what's going on. And let's just increase this to 125 or 195, and we'll do the same. And I'm actually going to move this further in. So let's just move both of these in like this. Let's move that back so it kind of lines up perfectly there. And to be honest, once I've set this one up, I could just clone it over to the left-hand side. Let's see, let's put that like that. And I kind of want to see more of the window, so we may have to just rejig some things, but let's put this into the volume builder and we'll just rejig this so that is set to union. So that's okay. And let's just enable the volume builder again and see how this looks. And we may have to just decrease the voxel size just so we can see everything a bit clearer just for now. And I may also drop the SDF smooth down a little bit as well. Let's drop that down to a voxel size of 2 and maybe 1 iteration, probably be okay for now. Give it a second to update, maybe set that to 1 iterations. But straight away you can see how this is working. So now we've created this nice curve going along the ceiling and it blends into the wall because I kind of lined it up how I wanted it to. And I'm actually going to just disable that, and let's just select both of these objects. So I'm just going to select both of those, holding shift, press Alt G to put it into a group, and let's put this into a cloner, set it to linear. I only want 2 of them. I want it 0 on the y-axis, but I want to move this over to -485, or actually maybe it's like this. There we go. And I can just delete that, don't need that anymore. And now we know that's kind of perfectly in the middle. Or actually what I might do is, there we go, let's try this. This might be a bit better. Okay, I'm gonna move these back to around about here, and that will allow us to see more of the window. And what I may now have to do is just increase the length of this spline. So let's just disable the extrude quickly, go to point mode, And let's just bring that over like this. And let's maybe create another point here. Just drag that out. So now when we enable this, we should see that, yep, go all the way along the top, which is perfect. And I think we also need to increase the height of these points just so it connects to the ceiling like so. Enable that. There we go. That's perfect. And if I just enable the volume builder and the volume mesher, hopefully we should see part of the window come in. And yeah, it will, as long as we just cut back this bit here, which is subtracting from the side. First of all, I need to drop this below the SDF smooth. I thought something looked a bit weird. There we go. That's updated pretty quickly, which is great. And let's, yeah, just move back kind of these window sections. So select that, make sure I'm in object mode, select that. And let's move it all the way back so it actually lines up with the edge of those kind of pillars that we made. So let's go in now, have a look at this. And I may have to actually increase the Z axis of these. So let's try this just so it actually kind of fills that whole left and right hand side of the wall. There we go. And now let's enable the volume builder and the volume mesher. Have a look at this. Boom. And now we get something like that, which is obviously not perfect just yet, but it's coming together. Let's dive out the camera and have a look at what we can do to make this a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to add some walls to the outside. And this is a great thing, is that you can kind of set up the interior as this really nice organic, and then you can like contrast it with some harsh just cubes for the wall outside. So I can just kind of have this here, have this as a wall outside, and then we'll do the same on the right hand side. And obviously you could optimize this so much more than what I'm doing. I would put it into some cloners to make everything a lot easier and quicker, but we can set that up. And then what I might do to, again, just bring in some more of that kind of fluid feel, is instead of having like this solid back wall, maybe we go into the top view and we grab our spline pen and we create a curved kind of wall along the back here. So maybe I just curve this like this, and that goes off to the side, and we just bring this in like that, create the thickness here like so. I'm going to hold shift to break that handle, and let's do the same on here, hold shift and drag, and now we have something like this. And we can drop this object into an extrude, hold alt, and just let's see, I might have to, is it going down? Yeah, okay. So the reason it's going down is I need to go to the spline. In point mode, press Control A, right click, and go to point order, reverse sequence, and now it should extrude upwards, which is a bit better, like that. And now I can drop this into the volume builder, again making sure it's below that SDF smooth. And now if I enable that, let's have a look. We get that lovely kind of curved back wall, which doesn't look like anything from this view we're looking at it, but when we start to render this with some lighting, we'll pick up on that nice kind of curved backdrop. So there's a couple things I want to do. I want to fix the ceiling, because at the moment this overhang on the top where the ceiling is going to stop quite a bit of light coming in from the sides, and obviously we want as much light as possible. So I'm just going to select the ceiling and drop down the width of that to something like, yeah, 700 is fine, as long as it kind of lines up with everything else. That's perfect. And that looks pretty good to me. What else? We could just neaten a few things up. So I could probably decrease this, or I could actually delete that now because we've already got a different wall in place. We could just bring that back a little bit, and I think everything else should be pretty good. If I really wanted to neaten things, I could select both of these walls here, decrease the height of these so it just really connects with the floor and the ceiling, just to tidy things up. But that doesn't really matter too much. And let's look inside, volume builder, volume mesher enabled, and now we have something like this.
So thank you for watching the video. I hope you found it useful and that there was some information you could take away and apply to your own projects. Like I said at the beginning, the volume builder and the volume mesher are super versatile and can be used for all sorts of different things. I just used it for this organic interior, which is quite a popular aesthetic. If you do want to learn more about the lighting and the texturing side of things and how we can use the volume builder to texture and some of the kind of intricacies of that, then you can check that out over on Patreon. But thank you again for watching this video. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.